Hey guys, what's going on? This is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com, and I want to talk to you today about high reps versus low reps. And I know this has been talked about a lot on different channels, but I want to show you the spin on what we do at Winning Strength and what I have found over the last 30 years of training, also getting a master's in biomechanics and staying injury free that entire time. But before we get to it, let's like, subscribe, and then comment on some rep ranges that you found the most muscle growth on. And let's have a talk on where I think your repetition ranges should fall in line with your workouts. Just like in the order of a normal winning strength workout, let's talk about high repetition ranges first. Now, where a lot of the information comes from on high repetitions, it's fairly vast. And what we see with, especially in Brian Schoonfield's newer book on hypertrophy, is that lots of rep ranges work for hypertrophy. In lighter workloads like the winning warm-up, where we do sets of 25 very regularly, the point of trying to do that is we're using less tension each rep, but we're having a ton of reps in a short period of time, which is increasing metabolites. You're getting a pump, you're getting a burn a little bit if the RPE is correct. But what you're starting to find is that most lifters don't train above 20 reps, which could be limiting your growth. But the other big thing it could be limiting is your passive tissue density. And what I have found over the last probably 15 years now of using winning warm-ups is ligament, tendon density, cartilage, all the passive tissue really responds well to high volume. And that was one of the major reasons why Winning Strength developed the winning warm-ups around 2012. At first, I thought it was a fatigue factor. I was doing a powerlifting meet. I hit the third highest total of all time. My bench press had fell about 30 pounds from the previous meet. I'm driving back home and I'm thinking, well, hell, this might be, just a conditioning thing. And the more I started digging around and looking and seeing some other studies and things coming out on passive tissue and things of that nature, what I started to find was that I was missing a key component of my training, which was higher volumes. Because back in the old Westside Barbell days, we would just warm up, we would do our heavy lifts and do 3, 4, maybe 5 accessory exercises at the end, and we would walk out. There was really no preparation. And what I find with high reps, especially people that need more weakness training and they need more certain isolated muscle groups to catch up to ones that are dominant, it needs high volume. You need to get a lot of contractions. And sometimes just going super heavy is not conducive for technique. So what I find is picking weights where you can maintain perfect technique or as close to perfect as possible, and then training in this 25 rep range really builds a solid motor pattern. We can't always be thinking about hypertrophy at all times. Hypertrophy sometimes in a single mindset starts to ignore the passive tissue and the other different factors that are involved in not only strength training, but being able to maintain strength training for long periods of time. So hopefully this will get you to dive into winning warm-ups a little bit more, and maybe you've been ignoring things over 20 reps and you need to get back to it. So that's my thought process on higher reps. We do have research and studies that it shows that it works. We do have some things talking about in the Russian text and things that it's very good for passive tissue. I know, and I'm sure there's research out there that shows it's really good for motor pattern efficiency. And if it's selected in correct areas for your weaknesses, it's going to start helping your motor patterns in a positive fashion anyway. So I hope that higher repetition ranges are not scaring you away because you think you have to go heavy all the time to make progress, because you don't. The next one I wanted to talk about was the middle ground. So we started off with lighter weights. Obviously, for doing winning warm-ups, it's considered a warm-up. It's in the 25 rep range. It doesn't mean it doesn't burn like a son of a bitch half the time, but it's still considered mostly a warm-up. We try to get it done in a very short time period. We try to keep the metabolic stress up pretty high for that 12, 14, maybe 15 minutes pre-main lift. We'll get to the main lift in a minute, but what I wanted to talk to you guys about was accessories. Now, accessories are kind of in that middle line. They're not maximal effort, but they're not high repetition ranges most times in the 20s or above. Usually what we do is we select exercises that we can get around 6, maybe 12, and at sometimes 15 reps. And sometimes we adjust or modify the tempos of the exercise, going slower on the concentric or the eccentric, changing a lot of different manipulatable variables in order to make sure that we're getting that 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe 15 rep range. This is very important for accessories and bringing about weak points, similar to the higher volumes that we do on winning warm-ups, but trajected in a fashion of even more tension. So I would consider this the mid-range, and this is what we use for accessory work. Accessories can vary depending on what your model of training is, but most times for me, accessories are usually 3, maybe 2, and sometimes 4 exercises afterwards. The Russians talked a lot about back in the day of your workout not really consisting of more than around 6 to 7 exercises. This is crucial because quality of movement is so important. So again, we can get caught up in volume, and I know that's what this video is talking about today. But what I want you guys to remember is that quality of movement is probably trumping almost everything in intensity and volume, etc. Quality of movement will allow you to keep doing these exercises for far longer. And again, I say this all the time, and the English may not be correct, but the person who gets the strongest is the one who lasts the longest. And usually that comes from impeccable technique, recovery, nutritional status, recovery, and then sleep. But the point being is that you really need to focus accessories in the 8 to 15 rep range in a general rule of thumb. So this is allowing the warm-ups to be up in the 20s and plus, and now we have accessories between 8 and 15. Notice what we're doing is we're trying to emulate or utilize multiple rep range skills in order to have a larger spectrum of hypertrophy. There is no, in my opinion, one perfect way to put on quality muscle tissue, especially functional muscle tissue, right? Bodybuilding training is one thing, but when we're trying to mix it with moving better, being just a better human overall, doing normal daily activities, sometimes bodybuilding exercises don't necessarily transfer, especially to sports in some cases. So what I find is that if we train a multitude of repetition ranges with a multitude of tensions, we're doing really, really well. And so accessories we try to base on in that middle rep range with high tension for those repetition ranges. Now, without making this video extremely long, we need to talk about 2 other types of ways that we train on the apps and on online coaching, depending on what your goals are. You have the maximal effort method, which is reserved for, I'd say, at least intermediate to advanced lifters. And you have the dynamic effort method, which sometimes holds the same validity. We don't want to use it with beginners that don't have good technique. But in the maximal effort method, a lot of times in my system, we use a ton of 5s. And 5s, I feel, are the hybrid ground between going as heavy and as high tension as possible while still having enough volume to create some hypertrophy. So you'll see a lot in the off seasons, we'll be in the 6s and the 5s. And then when we start getting into more of a powerlifting mindset, we start dropping down in the 3s and the 2s. And this doesn't mean that those repetition ranges are not good for hypertrophy. But what it does mean is that we want to specify our strength into maximal recruitment for 1 repetition maxes if we're trying to be a good lifter. For a lot of you guys listening, maybe being a good 1 rep max lifter is not in the cards, or maybe you're older. I'll be 46 this year, so I can understand the fact that you want to back away from doing maximal effort stuff as often. But for a lot of people, they ignore doing maximal effort work, which is also hindering not only their performance in hypertrophy, but their performance in internal and external motor unit coordination. I find that the older clients that I train and strategically put them at heavier workloads on a, say a quarterly basis, their coordination and their positioning on everything just gets better because they're having to co-coordinate multiple muscle groups in a maximal effort sense. You just can't use it all the time like you can in your youth. So we'll get to that maybe in a different video, but the point being is that think about how we're laying all of this out. We have maximal effort work that constitutes anything under 5 most of the time. We have winning warm-ups, which constitute things over 20. And then we have accessory work that fills the gap in between the maximal effort work and the winning warm-ups. This is the entire point of the video. The point of the video is that we don't ignore any rep ranges. And I find that for most people, that is the most beneficial way to train. Have different rep ranges of different qualities. In my mindset, and it may not be 100% perfect, but I think that it holds some ground, is that the warm-ups are designed for higher repetition ranges, that higher repetition hypertrophy, and mostly focusing on motor patterns and passive tissue. The middle range for the accessories is focusing on maximal hypertrophy with medium to higher levels of tension focused on areas of weaknesses and functional mass. And then lower than that is maximal effort method, which is allowing us to strain as maximal tension as possible. I find that having this mindset allows us to be able to train on a broad spectrum of hypertrophy ranges and give us a little bit more variety in our capacity to what we're doing. So if we need a little bit more of endurance, winning warm-ups covers that. If we need a little bit more hypertrophy work and being able to strain for 8, 10, 12, 15 reps, somewhere around that range, our accessories cover that. And if we really need to move something really heavy for 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 RM, our main lifts cover that as well. So if your goal is higher reps or lower reps, I think the goal should be all reps.
As a matter of fact, I'm on a strength training program from a world-class powerlifter, a world record-holding powerlifter, Matt Wenning.
Matt Wenning's the man. I have his belt squad. Not a bad plan.
And it's been a lot of fun training with so much structure and with so much focus on posterior chain. My glutes, my hamstrings, my low back is weaker than a kitten. It's embarrassing. So we're focusing on that. It's a well-rounded program.
Big thing about the posterior chain is if it's really strong, it just prevents a whole lot of different kinds of back injuries and leg injuries. And so if you have a really weak posterior chain, like that's a fucking problem. And you're going to want to rectify that by getting it stronger, especially if you're a physical person like Stone Cold is and doing a lot of physical stuff. Like you're going to want to lean into that shit. That's it's smart that he hired Matt Wenning for sure. Just generally a smart move to hire Matt Wenning.
I'm on Do For Me. I'm in the 3rd week. It's a 12-week process.
Periodization. It's nice.